The first drop of rain felt like a tear from heaven, a single, cold splash against my cheek that was quickly followed by a million others. It was as if the sky itself was weeping for the shattering of my world. But my son, Paul, standing in the warm, dry rectangle of the doorway, didn't seem to notice the storm. His face, the same face I had cradled in my hands when he scraped his knee, was now a mask of cold, resolute disgust. Behind him, in the shadowy hall, I could see the silhouette of his wife, Marissa, a silent, approving statue. "It's for the best, Mom," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth I'd spent a lifetime cultivating in him. "You have to see that. The doctor said your confusion is a strain. The kids are getting scared. You're just a burden we can't carry anymore." The word landed not like a slap, but like a surgeon's knife, precise and devastating, aimed straight at the core of every secret fear I'd ever harbored about growing old. Burden. I, Helen, who had worked double shifts as a nurse for 40 years to put him through college, who had held this family together with grit and grace after his father passed, who had skipped meals so he could have new soccer cleats. I was now ballast, to be jettisoned to keep their lives smoothly afloat. The doctor had mentioned mild forgetfulness, the kind that comes with 72 years of memories, and they had weaponized it, blown it up into a monstrous justification for this execution. My suitcase, a faded blue Samsonite that had been my constant companion for 40 years, through my wedding, through hospital stays, through the one vacation we could barely afford, hit the pavement with a wet, heavy thud. The sound was final, like the closing of a coffin lid. I didn't beg. What words could possibly bridge the chasm that had opened between us? My dignity, though frayed and tattered, was all I had left. I bent, my knees protesting with a sharp, arthritic ache, and gripped the handle. The cold water immediately seeped through the thin leather of my gloves. I turned my back on the house I'd lent them the deposit for, whose garden I'd tenderly planted with roses that now seemed to bow their heads in shame, and walked into the downpour. Behind me, the door clicked shut. Not a slam, but a soft, definitive click that was somehow more cruel. It was the sound of a life being erased, of history being rewritten with me as the inconvenient prologue. I walked. There was no destination, only a desperate need to put distance between myself and the site of the murder of my old life. The city, once familiar and comforting, had become a labyrinth of indifferent lights and rushing strangers. Cars hissed by on the wet asphalt, their headlights illuminating the silver sheets of rain, their occupants safe and dry, on their way to warm homes and waiting families. No one looked twice at the old woman shuffling through the storm, her suitcase leaving a wet snail's trail. I was invisible, a ghost in my own life, already fatting from the world's memory. The cold began to seep deep into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the icy truth settling in my heart. Each step was a struggle, my wet clothes heavy, my feet numb in their sodden shoes. I thought of the warm bed that had been mine, the familiar creak of the floorboards, the photographs on the mantelpiece that charted our history, all of it now part of a world from which I was permanently exiled. Finally, as my legs, old and tired, threatened to buckle completely, I found a sliver of shelter under the grim, graffiti-stained concrete of the overpass on Miller's Road. The air was thick with the smells of damp concrete, stale urine and exhaust fumes, the scent of despair. I collapsed onto the ground, not caring about the grime, and pulled my soaked suitcase under me, a pathetic attempt at insulation against the cold, unyielding ground. I leaned against the rough, vibrating wall, the traffic roaring overhead a constant, mocking reminder of a world that was moving on without me. This was my kingdom now, a concrete throne under a weeping sky. That night I didn't sleep. I shivered and replayed the movie of my life, searching for the moment the reel had slipped, for the scene where I'd become the villain in my own son's story. I remembered teaching Paul to ride his bike, my hand on the back of the seat, letting go only when I was sure he had his balance. I remembered the fierce pride on his face at his graduation, and the way he'd hugged me and whispered, "Thanks, Mom, for everything." I remembered the first time he'd placed his newborn daughter, Olivia, in my arms, and the profound sense of circle and legacy that had washed over me. Had it all been a lie? A performance? Or had I simply loved him too much, built him a world so comfortable and secure that he now saw me as part of the furniture, outdated, worn, and in the way. The rain slowed to a miserable drizzle around 3 a.m. A deep, soul-deep cold had settled in my core, a cold that no sunshine could ever hope to thaw. This, I thought with a terrifying clarity, is how it ends. Not with a dignified farewell surrounded by weeping family, but alone on the cold, hard ground, shivering and forgotten, my final memory the look of disgust on my own child's face. The injustice of it was a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. And then I saw her. A figure emerged from the pre-dawn mist, walking with a purpose and pace that seemed alien in this place of lost things. The weak light from a distant street lamp caught the elegant cut of a trench coat, the kind of garment that spoke of dry cleaners and boardrooms, not homeless shelters and rain-soaked streets. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion, hunger, and the crushing weight of my grief. But then she knelt, and the familiar, sophisticated scent of Chanel No. 5 cut through the urban stench of the underpass, a fragrance from another lifetime. Helen, my God, Helen. The voice was older, layered with a life of experiences I hadn't been part of, but it was unmistakable. I looked up, my neck stiff and protesting, into the face of my younger sister, Vivien. Her hair, once as dark and wild as mine, was now a sleek, stunning silver bob, soaked and glistening like mercury in the dim light. Her makeup, usually impeccable, was gone, washed away by the rain or perhaps hurriedly wiped away, and in her eyes I saw not pity, but a fury so intense it radiated a physical heat. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Her gaze, sharp and missing nothing, took in my shivering form, the pathetic, waterlogged suitcase, the utter ruin of my situation, and her jaw tightened into a hard line. Without a word, she reached out and brushed the wet, matted hair from my forehead, her touch surprisingly, heartbreakingly gentle. Then she took my icy, chapped hands in her warm, gloved ones. "Oh, my dear." "Foolish, proud sister," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name, a mixture of rage, sorrow, and a fierce, protective love. "What have they done to you?" That simple act of human contact, the first kind, unconditional touch I'd felt in years, broke a dam inside me I didn't know was still standing. A sob, raw and broken, wrenched itself from my throat, followed by another, until I was weeping uncontrollably, the tears hot against my rain-cooled skin. Vivien didn't shush me or offer empty platitudes. She simply let me cry, her hands holding mine, an anchor in my sea of despair. When my tears finally subsided into ragged hiccups, she stood, her movements efficient and sure. She helped me to my feet as if I were made of the most fragile glass, and picked up my suitcase as if it were a designer briefcase. She led me to a car parked a short distance away, a vehicle so sleek and silent it looked like a spaceship that had landed on the wrong planet. She opened the passenger door and I sank into the seat, the heated leather a shocking, almost painful luxury against my frozen skin. She started the car, and a wave of warm air enveloped me. Then she handed me a thermos from the center console. "Drink," she commanded softly. The tea inside was scalding hot, sweet with honey and a hint of brandy, and it sent a life-giving warmth radiating from my stomach out to my numb fingertips. We drove in silence, the wipers swishing a steady, hypnotic rhythm as we left my old life, my old self, behind in the rearview mirror. We didn't stop until we reached a clean, anonymous motel on the highway, a place of transit for those between lives. Vivien handled everything with a quiet authority, handing me a key card and a bag from a department store whose name I recognized from magazines. "Clean clothes," she said simply. "Everything you'll need for now. Take a hot shower. Scrub it all away. I'll be in the room next door." Under the scalding spray of the shower, I scrubbed at the grime, the rain, the shame, watching the dirty water circle the drain and wondering if I could ever feel truly clean again. When I emerged, wrapped in a towel that felt thicker than any I'd ever owned, I found Vivien sitting at the small table in my room, 2 glasses of amber liquid in front of her. "We're going to Clearwater, Florida," she announced, pushing a glass of whiskey towards me. "Tomorrow, I have a place there for you." "Vivien, I can't," I stammered, the humiliation rising like bile. "I have no money, I have nothing. My social security check goes into an account they control. I am utterly dependent." A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face, a smile I remembered from our childhood, the one she wore right before she executed a plan that would get us both in trouble. "Oh, but you do, Helen. You have everything, you just didn't know it." She opened her sleek tablet, tapped the screen, and turned it to face me. It showed a stunning real estate listing for a beachfront condominium in Clearwater, all clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and breathtaking, endless ocean views. "That's yours." "I bought it this morning. It's in your name and yours alone." I stared, uncomprehending. The numbers on the listing were a fantasy. "What? How? Vivien, that's impossible. I can't accept this." "And this," she continued, swiping to a different screen, a digital bank statement. My name, Helen Mugrat Russ, was clearly printed at the top. My eyes, disbelieving, dropped to the balance. I had to blink several times, sure I was seeing things. $10 million. "This is also yours. It's been in a blind trust for you for over a decade. I was waiting for the right time to tell you, to give you a fresh start without complications." She said the last word with venom, her eyes hardening into chips of flint. "It seems," she said, her voice low and steady, "the right time is now." The numbers on the screen swam before my eyes. $10 million, a luxury condo. It was too much, too surreal. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The woman who had been sleeping under a bridge, who had been thrown away like garbage hours ago, was now a millionaire. The whiplash was physical. "Why?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice cracking. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because you would have given it to them," she said, her voice sharp and sure. "You would have poured every last cent into Paul's bottomless pit of entitlement, into Marissa's bottomless desire for status, and you'd still be right where I found you tonight, only and even more broken. I love you, Helen, but your greatest strength has always been your greatest weakness. You give too much of yourself to people who don't deserve it. I couldn't let that happen to this. This was your escape fund, and by God, you are finally going to escape." She leaned forward, her gaze intense, capturing mine and holding it. "Helen, listen to me. You are not a burden. You are a queen they threw out of her own castle. You built that family with your blood, sweat, and tears, and it's time we reminded them of what they so carelessly discarded." As I lay in the motel bed later that night, the scratchy sheets felt like the finest Egyptian cotton. The steady hum of the air conditioner was a soothing lullaby. The cold, hard resolve that had begun to form under the bridge was now crystallizing into something else, something forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by an unexpected power, a fierce, unshakable purpose. Paul and Marissa thought they had won. They thought I was broken, that I would disappear quietly into the grim machinery of social services, a sad, whispered story to be forgotten. But as I stared at the stippled ceiling, a strange, serene calm settled over me. They had thrown me out into the cleansing rain, but they had no idea they were watering a seed of vengeance they would never see coming. The storm that had washed away my old life was not the end. It was merely the beginning. And this new storm, the one brewing quietly within me, was heading straight for them. The dawn broke over Florida not with a gentle yawn, but with a brilliant, defiant explosion of orange and pink across the sky. I watched it from the passenger seat of Vivien's car as we sped south, the flat landscape gradually giving way to the salt-kissed air of the coast. The motel, with its fleeting safety, was already a memory. I was moving toward a future I still couldn't fully grasp. The $10 million figure kept scrolling behind my eyes, a surreal ticker tape of liberation. It wasn't just money. It was a weapon, and Vivien was teaching me how to hold it. The condominium complex was called the Marbella. It was more beautiful than the pictures, a low-rise, cream-colored building nestled amidst lush, tropical greenery, with a shimmering blue lagoon pool at its center. The air hummed with the distant, rhythmic crash of waves. A uniformed security guard at a gated entrance nodded respectfully to Vivien and waved us through. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a new home, it was a fortress. Vivien parked in a reserved spot. She handed me the keys, a heavy brass fob, and gestured to the entrance. "Go on," she said. "It's yours." The lobby was cool and quiet, floored in marble, smelling of lemon polish and fresh orchids. The woman at the front desk, whose name tag read Anya, smiled warmly. "You must be Ms. Ross. Welcome home." The word sent a shiver through me. Home. The elevator was silent and swift. On the third floor, I slid the key into the lock of 3C and pushed the door open. The breath left my body. Sunlight flooded the open-plan living space, reflecting off the polished concrete floors and gleaming white surfaces. The entire far wall was a sliding glass door leading to a wide balcony, and beyond that, the Gulf of Mexico stretched to the horizon, an endless, moving tapestry of blue and green. It was vast, serene, and powerful. I walked through the space in a daze, running my fingers over the cool granite of the kitchen countertops, the soft fabric of the dove-gray sofa. It was furnished with a minimalist, elegant taste that felt both alien and deeply soothing. This was a place for a new kind of person, a person without baggage. Vivien watched me from the doorway, a satisfied glint in her eye. "The guest room has a writing desk overlooking the water. I thought you might like that." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of overwhelmed gratitude, of a hope so sharp it was almost painful. The peace, however, was a fragile bubble. Vivien was a general, and she knew the enemy would not simply surrender. That evening, as I was unpacking the few new things she'd bought me, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, but I knew the tone immediately. "Mom, it's Paul. We need to talk. Where are you? We're worried sick." The audacity of it, the sheer, galling concern, made my hand tremble. I showed it to Vivien. Her lips thinned into a tight line. "They've realized their asset has gone missing," she said coolly. "And they're panicking. Do not respond. Silence is a wall they don't know how to climb." But they kept trying. Calls to my old, disconnected number were forwarded to Vivien's secure line. They left messages, their voices evolving from faux-worried to frustrated to thinly veiled angry. "Mom, this is ridiculous. Call me back," Paul demanded in one. Marissa tried a sweeter tack in another. "Helen, sweetie, the kids miss their grandma. We just want to know you're safe." Safe, the word was a poison dart. The greatest threat to my safety had been them. A week after my arrival, Vivien orchestrated my first public appearance, a small welcome to the building gathering in the clubhouse. She dressed me in a simple, elegant linen outfit, another gift. "Armor," she called it. I felt like an imposter, a ghost dressed in a rich woman's clothes, but I held my head high. The party was a pleasant murmur of polite retirees and a few younger, wealthy professionals. I was clinging to the periphery, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, when I felt the air in the room change. I looked towards the entrance. They stood there, Paul and Marissa, as if they'd been beamed in from my worst nightmare. They were dressed with a careful, middle-class formality. Paul in a button-down shirt he'd clearly struggled to iron, Marissa in a beige dress and pearls, her smile as brittle as glass. They scanned the room, their eyes landing on me with a mixture of shock and voracious calculation. Vivien materialized at my side before I could even process the sight. She moved towards them, a sleek predator intercepting two clumsy interlopers. I was too far to hear the words, but I saw the scene play out in pantomime. Vivien's posture was rigid, an unmovable barrier. Paul's face flushed red. Marissa's smile tightened until it looked like it might crack her face. After a brief, tense exchange, Vivien made a subtle gesture to a staff member. Within seconds, they were being escorted out, Paul shooting a look of pure, impotent fury over his shoulder directly at me. The confrontation I had dreaded was over before it began. Vivien had handled it with the efficiency of a CEO dismissing incompetent subordinates. But the message was sent and received. They knew where I was, and they knew I was protected. The next morning, Vivien arrived at my door with a leather-bound folder and a woman I'd never met. "Helen, this is Grace Hollander, my attorney, and now yours." Grace was a tall, severe-looking woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense handshake. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. She opened the folder on my new kitchen table. "They're shifting tactics," she said, pointing to a document. "The emotional appeals aren't working, so they're going legal. Paul contacted a firm specializing in elder law. He's inquiring about power of attorney and conservatorships." The blood drained from my face. A conservatorship. They wanted to have me declared incompetent to legally seize control of everything. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "Don't panic," Grace said, her voice calm and clinical. "It's a common bullying tactic, but it requires evidence of incapacity, which is why we're going to create evidence of the opposite." She slid a consent form towards me. "I'm scheduling you for a full battery of cognitive and psychological evaluations with the most respected specialists in the state. We will have a documented, professional opinion that you are of sound mind, sharper than most. We will bury them in paperwork, all of it proving their narrative is a lie." It was brilliant. While they were scheming in the shadows, we were building a fortress of facts in the light. The final straw, the moment my last vestige of maternal sentimentality evaporated, came a few days later. A man in a cheap suit appeared at my door, claiming to be from a family wellness service, sent by my son to conduct a well-being assessment. He had a clipboard and an overly sincere smile. I remembered Vivien and Grace's advice. I did not let him in. I simply said, "I have no son," and closed the door, my heart pounding a violent rhythm against my ribs. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of Paul's furious face at the party, the sound of the lawyer's words, the memory of that man at my door, it all coalesced into a cold, hard diamond of resolve in my chest. They weren't my family. They were adversaries, and I was done playing defense. I went to the writing desk in the guest room, the one with the ocean view. I opened a blank notebook, another gift from Vivien. The moon painted a silver path across the water. I picked up a pen, my hand steady for the first time in years. At the top of the page, I wrote a single sentence. "The foundation of my new life, the Ruth Ellery Foundation." Beneath it, I began to outline my counterattack. It wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be poetic. I would take the very thing they coveted, the money, the security, the legacy, and I would place it forever beyond their reach. I would create something beautiful and enduring with it, a monument to my own survival that would stand long after they were forgotten. The $10 million wouldn't be my nest egg. It would be a shield for others like me. The condo wouldn't just be my home. It would be a symbol of my unassailable freedom. They had thrown me out with nothing but a suitcase. I would answer them with a legacy. The game was on, and for the first time, I was the one writing the rules. The silence after I closed the door on the fake wellness assessor was louder than any slamming door. It was a silence filled with the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sigh of the ocean, and the crystalline shattering of the last illusion I'd held about my son. There was no going back. The line in the sand had been not just crossed, it had been paved over by their relentless avarice. Vivien and Grace moved with the synchronized precision of a special ops team. My life became a whirlwind of appointments. I sat through hours of cognitive tests, memory recall, pattern recognition, problem solving. I underwent a full psychological evaluation. I met with financial advisors and estate planners. With each professional who shook my hand at the end of a session and commented on my sharpness and clarity, I felt another brick being laid in the fortress we were building. We were creating an unassailable paper trail, a monument to my competence that would tower over their pathetic lies. Meanwhile, their efforts grew more desperate. They sent letters, now on the letterhead of a lawyer named Mr. Albright, filled with veiled threats and legalese about familial duty and the perils of undue influence. Vivien would read them aloud at my kitchen table, her voice dripping with theatrical contempt before filing them away in a growing evidence of harassment folder. The pivotal moment came on a Tuesday. Grace arrived, her usual composure crackling with a contained electric energy. She placed her laptop on my counter. "They've overplayed their hand," she said, her voice tight with what I realized was triumph. "They've submitted documents to the probate court, a petition for a temporary conservatorship." My heart stuttered, but Grace held up a hand. "Attached to it," she continued, clicking open a file, "is what they claim is a power of attorney document signed by you, granting Paul full financial control, dated 2 months ago." I stared at the scanned image on the screen. The signature was a clumsy forgery, a child's imitation of my flowing cursive. "I never signed that," I whispered, a cold fury beginning to replace the fear. "Of course you didn't," Grace said. "But look here." She zoomed in on the notary stamp. "The notary, a John Phillips, certified it. Vivien had him investigated." She opened another window. Mr. Phillips is currently under review by the State Notary Public Board for fraudulent certifications. He's a friend of Paul's from college. This was it. The mistake Vivien had said they would make. They hadn't just lied. They had committed fraud, and they had been stupid enough to do it with a corrupt notary. "We have them," I said, the words feeling solid and sure in my mouth. "We have them," Grace confirmed. "But we don't just block them, we counterattack." The plan was beautiful in its ruthlessness. We would not simply defend against their petition. We would file a lawsuit of our own. Helen Ross versus Paul and Marissa Ross for fraud, attempted elder exploitation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And we would do it very, very publicly. The day of the hearing arrived. I dressed not in the frumpy, forgiving clothes of a grandmother, but in a tailored, steel blue suit Vivien had chosen. It was the color of a winter sky, of calm authority. As I walked into the courthouse, flanked by Vivien and Grace, I felt not like a victim, but like a CEO walking into a boardroom to dismiss an incompetent subordinate. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, all dark wood and hushed tones. Paul and Marissa were already there, huddled with a sweaty, anxious-looking man I assumed was Mr. Albright. Paul wouldn't meet my eyes. Marissa's gaze was a laser of pure, undiluted hatred. Their lawyer stood first, painting a picture of a confused, vulnerable elderly woman, manipulated by a predatory sister into giving away her life's assets, putting her own financial security and well-being at risk. He used words like isolation and cognitive decline. He held up the forged power of attorney as if it were a holy relic. When it was Grace's turn, she rose with a quiet, terrifying grace. She didn't raise her voice. She systematically, methodically, took their case apart. She entered my cognitive evaluations into the record. "A perfect score," she stated flatly. She entered the bank records, showing the $10 million had been in my name for over a decade, long before Vivien's influence. Then she approached the bench with our kill shot. "Your Honor, the petitioner's entire case rests on the authenticity of this document," she said, holding up the forged power of attorney. "We submit into evidence the sworn affidavit of Mr. John Phillips, the notary public who certified it." The air in the room stilled. Mr. Albright looked confused. Paul had gone pale. Grace read a section aloud. "Upon further reflection, I have no independent recollection of witnessing Helen Ross's signature on this document. The journal I am required by law to keep contains no entry for that date. I believe I may have been misled by my friendship with Paul Ross into improperly notarizing this form." It was a masterpiece of legal CYA, orchestrated by Grace, who had clearly explained the consequences of perjury to Mr. Phillips. The foundation of their case crumbled to dust in an instant. But Grace wasn't finished. She then entered our own lawsuit into evidence, the one nomming them as defendants. She detailed the phone calls, the uninvited appearance at the Marbella, the fake wellness check. She painted a picture not of a confused old woman, but of a resilient one being systematically hunted by her own children for her money. The judge, a weary-looking woman with intelligent eyes, listened intently. When Grace finished, she turned to Paul and Marissa's lawyer. "Mr. Albright," she said, her voice dry as dust, "do you have any evidence at all, that isn't based on a document your own notary has now disavowed?" Mr. Albright stammered, "Your Honor, the family's concerns." "Are not evidence," the judge interrupted. "The petition for conservatorship is denied, dismissed with prejudice." She slammed her gavel. The sound was a gunshot of finality. "And I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into fraud and attempted elder exploitation. This court is adjourned." It was over, just like that. Paul stared straight ahead, his face a slack mask of shock. Marissa began to cry, not tears of remorse but of rage and thwarted ambition. They had lost, not just the case but everything. As we walked out, Paul finally looked at me. The disgust was gone, replaced by a hollow, bewildered fear. "Mom," he began, his voice a broken thing. I stopped and looked at him, my son, the stranger. I felt no hatred in that moment, only a profound, bottomless pity. You drew a line, Paul, I said, my voice calm, echoing in the marbled hallway. You chose your side, stay on it. I turned and walked away, Vivien and Grace falling into step beside me. I did not look back. The aftermath was a quiet, satisfying unraveling. The district attorney did press charges. To avoid a public trial and possible jail time, Paul and Marissa accepted a plea deal that included probation, massive fines, and most importantly, a permanent, legally binding restraining order and a formal renunciation of any and all claims to my estate, present and future. I never spoke to them again. With the war over, I turned my energy entirely to the Ruth Ellery Foundation. We launched it with a quiet, powerful event at the community center. I stood at the podium, looking out at a room filled not with pitying faces, but with determined ones, single mothers, widows, survivors. This foundation, I said, my voice strong and clear, is not built on a fortune. It's built on a fracture. It's built to ensure that no woman ever has to feel the cold of a concrete bed or the colder heart of a thankless child. It is my story, transformed into your shelter. I funded legal aid for seniors fighting exploitation. I created a network of safe, affordable housing for women over 60 starting over. We named a scholarship for nursing students after Charles. My money was no longer a number in a bank. It was a legion of shields, protecting others from the storm I had endured. One afternoon, months later, I was on my balcony, the journal my father had sent me, my grandmother Eleanor's journal, open on my lap. The inscription, "For Eleanor, who has the courage to grow her own garden in the shade of a great oak," felt less like a description of her and more like a prophecy for me. Vivien joined me, handing me a glass of iced tea. We sat in a comfortable silence, watching the pelicans glide over the waves. "You're happy," she stated, more than asked. I looked out at the endless, horizonless ocean. I thought of the cold under the bridge, the sound of the door clicking shut, the terror of the courtroom. I thought of the warmth of this sun, the solidity of these walls, the purpose in my days. "I am not just happy, Vivien," I said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face. "I am free." They thought they were throwing away a burden. They were actually throwing away the anchor that was holding them down, and in doing so, they set me free to finally, truly sail. The past was a ghost. The future was a wide-open sea. And for the first time in my life, I was the captain of my own ship, the architect of my own legacy, and the author of my own, fiercely won, happy ending.